Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
How we doing? I am going to I'm going to start letting everyone in here into the Zoom.
Okay.
Everyone. Cool. Just giving another 15 seconds for everyone to join. At 2 o'clock, it's like everyone piles into the waiting room. So it's perfect. Great. All right, well, let's get started. It's 2:01 here. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Thursday 2 o'clock call. Now this is our 7th one in a row, so really keeping up with the traction here and keeping it going week by week. Every week we try to bring some sort of value to you and hope that it's making an impact. And what better time to spend while we're all dealing with this COVID crisis than to learn and improve knowledge here. But today I'm fortunate for the opportunity. We have former Mayor John F. Street with us today. We have a couple questions, obviously, to ask him about the current state of what's going on. And if you had a chance, I know a bunch of people filled out the survey, just regarding some questions relating to City Council and your knowledge about the city budget and spending, which would be kind of exciting to see some of the results and go over it. But yeah, without further ado, Rachel, why don't you just kind of give a highlight to, what we're doing today? Oh,
you're on mute.
Rachel's muted.
Sorry, technical difficulty.
Yeah, very unusual.
Oh, thank you. Today we have Mayor Street on. He is obviously a former mayor, and we're lucky enough that he is a PLG senior advisor. He's become a very good friend. He's going to give us some remarks on the status of the city as he sees it, discuss the budget questionnaire, and then we'll do an open Q&A. And then we'll do our L&I updates, a Q&A with the team, any questions people have, and then the next 2 weeks topic. We kind of got ahead of ourselves this week.
We're now scheduled 2 weeks out in advance. That's exciting.
Yeah.
It went from like 24 hours to 36 hours, and now we're 2 weeks out. This is great. We're getting there.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to let Adam do, I guess, what would be sort of the mayor's bio and a nice intro for all the work he's done for our city.
Yes, exactly. And certainly an impressive resume in the public sector. So Mayor Street, if you don't know, is an attorney, is an active attorney. And he was also our city's 97th mayor from the period of 2000 to 2008. Before serving as mayor, he spent, well over and basically 2 full decades as a city councilman in the 5th Councilmanic District, which is, most notably has Center City within its boundaries. And also he governed, and when we say that, that area is governed by Darrell Clark, who also was part of his administration at the same time when Mayor Street was a councilman. And then Mayor Street served actually as the city council president for 7 of the 19 years. He worked very intimately with Mayor and also former Governor Ed Rendell. He is probably the most knowledgeable person I know in this space, having served 30 years, if you total it all up, in the public sector. And, currently on top of working with us on various political efforts, he also happens to spend a little time teaching our youth as an adjunct professor at Temple. So thank you so much for coming.
And I also want to add, because our topic is the budget, I found this so interesting. And I didn't know this, and he's never mentioned this to me through our many conversations, but he was instrumental in implementing a financial plan that passed council unanimously, which that doesn't always happen where finances are involved, and turned a $250 million deficit into the largest budget surplus in city history. I think that really foreshadows our conversation, and I think that's just definitely worth noting.
Surplus, a word we're not used to hearing.
Yeah. So with that said, you want to just open up a little bit, Mr. Mayor, and kind of just
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. And how's everybody today?
We're
Are the
great.
microphones on or off? I'm very pleased to be here. I must admit that I am sitting on Rittenhouse Square with my back to the Rittenhouse Hotel. It is gorgeous out here, and I couldn't think of a better place to sit to talk to a bunch of people who are interested enough in the city's growth and development and future in order to kind of log on and spend a few times. The one thing that was not said about my introduction is that I was an activist lawyer for a while, and I graduated law school in 1975. I filed my first lawsuit against the city in 1973, long before I became a practicing lawyer. And when I got elected to city council in 1980, to, to my dismay, but not surprise, city council really didn't know how to pass an ordinance with an amendment in conformance with the first class cities enabling legislation or the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter. And back in those days, city council members had two staff people. You had a driver and a part-time aide. Um, we had we had no technology. We had one fax machine for the entire of city council. If you wanted to get a fax, you had to give somebody the number and then go stand down there and wait for it to come, or else everybody had a copy. But it was different, and we actually went through a transition, and it's a transition that I believe will rival the transition that we are getting ready to go through now in the city. Now, when I was the mayor, I used to say that I'll be brief no matter how long it takes. Um, and I'm tempted to try to tell you everything I think I know about all of this in about 10 minutes. But what I've decided to do is spend most of the time listening to you and answering some questions. But before I do so, I would like to point out that the city of Philadelphia is very different from every other city in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We're a municipality. We are a county. We are subject to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as a political subdivision of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We are also subject to the federal government. So we get regulated by the federal government, by the state. We get regulated by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in a way that's different from any other city because we're a county. Now, most people think Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, we're both counties. So Pittsburgh is a city, but Pittsburgh is not a county, which means Pittsburgh doesn't have social service responsibility like the city of Philadelphia has, which means it complicates everything we do. Back in I guess it was 51, we passed the Home Rule Charter change, and we adopted a, a significantly modified form of government. And it is now, next year will be, 70 years later, and we're basically operating under that same form of government. Our politics have become almost uniquely complicated because we operate under a state election law, we operate under a federal election law, and we operate under a local election law. And so it creates certain problems for us. We have a uniformity clause that limits dramatically the way we tax. There are provisions in state law that say we are preempted from taxing regulated businesses, which means our local business tax is not applicable to financial institutions, Comcast, any of the big organizations. And it just creates real problems for us. So for us, after the city experienced a huge loss in population as a result of the loss of manufacturing and some other things, population shifted from the city to the suburbs. So we find ourselves in a situation where somewhere between 25 and 30% of the people who live in this city live at or below the poverty level. We have the highest rate of deep poverty of any major city in the United States of America. We are creating hospitality jobs, but we're not creating living wage jobs. And we have one of the highest tax burdens of any major city in the United States of America. We have the highest wage tax. And for us, doing business is tough. While I was sitting here waiting to start, I got a message from one of our council members that said, you know, the city of Philadelphia, we bragging about the fact that we took back control of our schools. We took back control of our schools. Our schools today are as bad, if not worse than they've ever been. They are underfunded. And if the city of Philadelphia, if our city thinks it can fully fund schools in this city, we are in a lot of trouble. And so we have some really, really tough problems. And there are no real easy solutions. During the course of the mayor's first term, he increased spending by over $1 billion. The real estate tax went up dramatically. And now we're in a position where I think a lot of people are reconsidering the relationship between the city and its suburbs, the city and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I like to say the lines between the city and the suburbs are being blurred even further by this new idea that you can have a job in the city, but you can work in your home outside of the city and not be subject to the wage tax the way you may have been. So I think these are going to be some really, really challenging times for us. And it always bothers me that in the city of Philadelphia today, we really don't seem to have an organized business community. The Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce has decided that it's a regional organization and doesn't really worry about city problems the way it used to. And so, you know, in many ways, we're kind of on our own. And as a person who was involved for 3 decades, every significant thing that happened in the city of Philadelphia, including the development of the convention center, doing stadiums, and all of the big things that happened here, it all happened because we had an active business community that we could go to Harrisburg with and say, look, this is something the city of Philadelphia needs. So I think this is a really, really interesting time politically for us. And I'm hoping that there are some people on this call who will decide that they're not going to sit on the sideline and that they are really going to be really active and engaged. I dropped my paper. They're really active and engaged so that we can deal with some of the problems that confront us. I'm still unhappy about the outside money that is now dominating our politics. In the mayor's reelection, he got two large contributions, one of which was $1 million in an independent expenditure group. That made it very difficult for anybody to compete against him. The building trades, I think, put up maybe $500,000, and under our local campaign finance law, it's very difficult to raise money and compete. Now, I thought I saw among the participants a guy by the name of David Hyman. And if David Hyman is here, I'd like to salute David Hyman, because I can tell there are a lot of people that work with me in the street administration and before, but not one was more important and more useful and more helpful than David Hyman. And I hope he's on this call. And if he is, I'll take this opportunity to thank him right now. I mean, I regard him as a really, really friend. I will tell you, when we took over the city of Philadelphia, PGW was bankrupt. And I asked David Hyman and some other folks to go over there, and they straightened it out. They really did. So much so that people are now talking about selling it and getting the profit and using it to fund local government. I'm not so sure I'm for that, but it is really a testament of the work of David Hyman and a number of other people who actually worked at PGW almost like it was a full-time job. So, you know, those are my brief remarks. I did prepare a little quiz. I guess it's the the professor in me that comes tumbling out every time I have to do something. So how do you want to do that?
Yeah, well, I think we'll run it down and we'll go over each one. Brian can start us off with that. I think, even as what we deem as somewhat experts and professionals in this, even I and Rachel said we didn't have all the answers to these. So we're going to be just as enlightened as everybody else.
For those of you that didn't get a chance, we'll go through it in a second. There was like 10 questions that Mayor Street put together just to quiz everyone's knowledge of, city council and the city in general for how it works. So let's just get into it. And Mayor Street, any insight? But question one was, how much of the city's budget is required to be spent because council and the mayor adopt a general fund operating budget? Again, all these questions had multiple answers, but B and E were tied, which I thought was.
Can you also just, I'm, a lot of people do know, but Mr. Mayor, if you could just explain what the general fund is, just briefly, so those who are not as well versed on municipal finance can follow along a little better.
Well, every year the city of Philadelphia adopts a general fund budget. It's our operating budget. It's the fund that we use from which we pay police, fire, Department of Public Property employees, L&I employees, law department, all the agencies. It's our general fund. And we go through this long, laborious process of approving the budget. And so the question is, how much of the budget is required to be spent because we adopt a general fund budget? And the answer is, so what were the responses? Do you all have any of the responses?
Yeah, so we put, if you notice here, we put on the list, and you might not have it up, but it looked like B and E were tied as far as results. So that was 59% and then 0%.
Well, the answer is 0%. City council goes through this entire process.
Oh
I mean,
God.
they stay down there for hours and hours and hours. I did this, right? And at the end of the day, there's no expenditure that has to be made as a result of the adoption of that budget. We spend because we have contracts. We have a contract with unions. We have contract with bondholders. We have contracts, with a variety of other agencies. We have a contract with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that provides children and youth services. It is as a result of those contracts that we have to spend. It is not as a result of adopting any budget. In fact, I can tell you that in many ways, how can I say this and be politically correct? It's almost worthless. Okay, question number two. Question number two.
Great, let's move. How much of the city's general fund operating budget can council force the mayor to spend? The question, obviously it was A, 75%, 59, 26, 10%, or 0. And the most common responses were 0. So is that right, or?
0.
0, okay.
Council can't make the mayor spend a dime. The mayor spends what the mayor wants to spend if the mayor decides to spend it. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that council puts money. The only thing council can do is put money in a budget category such that, and then if the mayor wants to spend it, the mayor can spend it, but the mayor doesn't have to. I had a situation where city council wanted to increase staffing in the health centers, and council said, it takes 2 weeks to get an appointment for health care in the health center. I knew people in the private sector who are waiting 6 months, 3 months, 6 weeks, 8 weeks to get an appointment to see a doctor. So I said, I don't know why people who are getting free health care should be able to get an appointment in 2 weeks, and all the rest of us that pay for our health care take 6, 8 weeks, and sometimes months. So they put this money in the budget, and it sat there for the entire year. I didn't spend a dime, not one dime. Yeah. And you know what? There was almost nothing council could do about it.
Cool.
Okay.
And that money, Mr. Mayor, is now, if it's not used, it's up for debate again the next year.
It stays in the fund balance, and it can be reprogrammed to in whatever way the council wants to reprogram it, working with the mayor. But there's nothing council can do. In fact, I will tell you, the City Council of Philadelphia actually passed a law requiring that the city of Philadelphia pick up condominium trash. And I said, well, we're not doing that because it will require the expenditure of tens of millions of dollars. So they passed the law. I told all my friends on city council, you can vote for it. It's never going to happen. They passed it. I vetoed it. They overrode the veto. They sued. I lost. They did it again. I lost. We're still not picking up condominium trash.
Got it.
because it's almost impossible for council to make a mayor do something that the mayor doesn't want to do.
Yep.
Okay.
Number 3. So the mayor can spend almost any amount of money for just about anything without city council approval. The majority put false.
That is absolutely true.
Wow.
Wow.
I work with city council. We adopted a budget in, I don't know, 2002, something like that. It was in maybe April or May. Typically, I got my budgets with city council in May. In August of the next year, 2 months into the fiscal year, I implemented a program called the Safe Streets Program. I put 2 cops on each of 309 corners for 3 shifts. I shut down every single open air drug market in the city of Philadelphia. I spent somewhere between $60 and $80 million and never asked for council's approval.
Wow.
And council was saying, well, how can you do this? How can you do this? And so what I said was, you should file a nominating petition and put at the top of it mayor. And so council can't stop the mayor from spending. Now, a lot of these rules have been adopted. There are provisions of the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter that have been interpreted by courts, and they've been interpreted in a way that has dramatically increased the powers of the mayor to spend. And I knew about all of it, and not a lot of mayors did or do. And so if a mayor wants to, I mean, people laugh at me when I say in any given year, a mayor can spend $50, $60 million and doesn't even necessarily have to tell council.
Might be hard to go unnoticed, but I get the point. I get the point.
All right, let's keep rolling. So question 4, council cannot stop the mayor from taking the 10-year tax abatement from any existing property.
People are really, we even had it written here. People were very interested in the answer to this.
There's like a drum roll here for the real answer, but most people said false to this.
That is absolutely true.
Wow.
The city, the mayor and the Office of Property Assessment reassessed 1 year, I forget the year, they reassessed all 10-year tax abated property. They moved value through the assessment process from the improvements to the land. And as you know, under the 10-year tax abatement, the value of the land is not abated. And there were people who originally had their property was assessed at 80-20, 80% for the improvement, 20% for the land. The Office of Property Assessment went through and said, oh no, we think that's wrong. And so we're assigning 60% of the value to the improvements and 40% of the value to the land.
Wow.
Those property owners got a 100% increase in their real estate taxes.
So
they did that.
So, Mayor Street, I just want to clarify this because this is a highly debated issue. Obviously, with the extent, the pending possible extension and indefinite right now that it's 12/31 for the new tax abatement. So you're saying for land it can change at any given time, but for the new improvements it isn't. Can you just elaborate just a little bit further on that?
Okay, so you get a 10-year tax abatement on a development. They don't abate the value of the taxes on the land.
Mm-hmm.
They abate the value, right, of the improvements on the land.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were people that had a 10-year tax abatement. His apartment, the Office of Property Assessment went through and said, we think we have to redistribute the value of your parcel, including the land and the improvements. And they said that it was hypothetically 80% of the value is attributable to the improvements and 20% to the land. They changed it. They said, no, we think it's 60-40 and not 80-20. So instead of your property being taxed at the 20% of the value, they moved value. I sat in a court case every single day. I heard the testimony. They actually shifted the value from the improvements to the land, and they they basically took the tax abatement. They took it. And I was very unhappy, because if you get a tax abatement and you go to your bank and you say, this is the value. Now, it's one thing for them to say the value of the land has gone up. So just reassess the value of the land. They didn't do that. They reassessed the value of the land, and they moved, literally said, it was testimony that they moved value from the improvements down to the land.
Wow.
And so under those circumstances, you don't know if the city council of Philadelphia is able to do that, then your tax abatement doesn't mean very much.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting to. Like, everyone's worried about, the improvements, this whole pending bill where it's going from 10 years to 5.5, but at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like it really matters. If
Well,
the
I will
city
tell
changes
you,
the sliding bar from 40% to 50%.
look, I sat right in the courtroom. I think the judge was maybe Judge Cohen, and I was flabbergasted. I was stunned. I actually filed a lawsuit against the city of Philadelphia because I thought the way they were handling assessments is illegal. I think it was never intended, but that's another whole story. Let's go to the next one.
Sure. So the mayor needs city council approval to raise the real estate tax in any amount beyond the rate of inflation. So the majority of the audience said true.
That is absolutely false. That is absolutely false.
We're not doing so hot right now.
No, we're not.
Okay, so listen to this. In the current 5-year plan, and that's the 5-year plan that goes from 2019 to 2023, there are $2.5 billion worth of real estate tax increases, and there has been no vote of city council to raise real estate tax rates, not one. What the city of Philadelphia, what Mayor Kenny did, he proposed to raise real estate tax rates 2 or 3 times. And every time, Councilman Dom will attest, every time city council said no. But it didn't matter, because the Office of Property Assessment reports to the finance director, and they went out and they went on a rampage doing reassessments, and they reassessed properties for 3 years. And if you aggregate the amount of real estate tax increases in the current 5-year plan, not the one under consideration, it amounts to $2.5 billion. And that's what set me off. That pushed me over the line. If the mayor doesn't need city council to raise real estate taxes in that amount, why do we need city council? Why do we need city council if you can look around one day and you got an 80% increase in your real estate tax? If you look around and some real estate tax assessor said, oh my God, you have a garage. Oh, garages are really, really important. Your taxes go up 82%.
Sounds like
that's
a new
literally what they
bill.
did.
Sounds like a new bill that might have to be introduced to change it.
Well, we can talk about that, but I will tell you, I will say this, and I say this respectfully. There were members of city council who pretend like they're not for real estate tax increases, and when you ask them, are you going to vote for a real estate tax increase? They say, no, I'll never vote for a real estate tax increase. The people can't afford to pay it. But when Mayor Kenny and his people raised all the rates, all those real estate tax assessments, they said nothing, zero. They said not one word. And I know Councilman Dom said something. I know Councilman O'Neill said something. And there were a bunch of council members who said something. But it's really, really hard, to decide, that you're going to try to figure out a way to take on the mayor when the mayor just goes and raises the real estate tax assessments as opposed to having council raise the rate.
It's not taxes, right? We don't use the word tax. We use the word assessment. It sounds nicer. Sounds cleaner.
Yeah, well, so I can raise your real estate taxes in one of 2 ways. I can raise the rate, or I can raise the base.
Mm-hmm.
Same rate, higher base. And that's what they did. And I will tell you, if you want to destroy the city of Philadelphia, if you want to have runaway, out of control real estate tax increases that will significantly reduce the city's competitiveness, allow the current real estate tax assessment process to continue.
Yep.
Okay.
Great. We're getting there. These questions are getting better and better. Let's keep going. The city is required to keep an inventory of all city contracts, even though it never does. Great. Everyone put true. So let's.
The answer, everybody put true. The answer is absolutely false. The city is not required to keep an inventory of any contracts. The city doesn't keep an inventory of any contracts. And if you right now were to ask for a list of all city contracts, it might take 2 years for you to get that list.
They'll say, we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
And I wonder, Mayor Street, if we were even in a small transaction, us, the people, would have an attorney reviewing this. Who's doing the reviewing of this legislation on our behalf, so that when it does get passed, we don't feel like this came up, like, for example, how everybody's saying, oh, this is true, and we're all, a bit flabbergasted that that's the case.
You're saying who reviews contracts?
Yeah, who's reviewing these contracts for on behalf of the people?
I actually have a contract question later on that I'll get to that.
All right.
If you don't mind.
Yep.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I have a contract. Yeah, I have a contract question in there.
Yeah, you do.
I do.
Okay.
I'm hoping the people that are watching this and they just aren't watching the web because we keep getting all these questions wrong highlighted. I'm just, hopefully they listen to it and realize that we're just striking out here. All right, so question 7. The city budget process was changed by the state in 1992 and now must do line item budgeting. True, said the masses.
False. Absolutely false. Absolutely false. We don't have line item budgeting. We never have line item budgeting. The police department's budget is about $700 million, and it's all but about 9-10 words. It's about 7 or 8 numbers, and it's an aggregate amount at the bottom. It's 100, 200, 300, 400, maybe 500, 700. And as a result of the adoption of the police department's budget, the city of Philadelphia and the mayor is not mandated to do anything as it relates to the police department. But when you hear all those budget hearings and they come in with all the budget in brief and all the piles and piles of material saying what's in the budget, all of it is an aspiration. It's the mayor's aspiration. This is what I plan to do if I feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
None of it. The mayor isn't required. The mayor isn't required. It is, and sometimes it's not even an aspiration. Sometimes it's just like, okay, it's a fantasy. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen it. They come in. I went to city council in 1980. In 1981, I was asked we had a council president. We were all sitting there trying to figure out how to deal with the budget. And I remember saying, I can cut $50 million out of the budget in 5 minutes. And the reason you can do that is because there's no detail. I mean, there's just no detail. And so we go through this long, laborious budget process. And at the end of it, you and I have no way of knowing whether or not the things the mayor said he or she was going to do were actually done. And so it's all kind of like, okay, here's some ideas, and, it would be nice if we could do this, but at the end of the day, nothing is required. Okay.
Next one. The mayor can only enter into contracts without council approval if they are for less than a year or an amount less than, and the masses said $1 million. The other choices were 50,000, 100,000, 250,000.
That is absolutely wrong. There is no minimum in the amount of money that the mayor can contract in any one year.
I am hearing that now. It's a trick question.
There is no amount. So the mayor can enter into. I was once sitting on city council when the mayor proposed a contract for 1 year with 29 renewals. So the mayor could say to Hyman and Associates, my favorite people, do this for me. It's a 1-year contract. We don't need council approval. And if I'm the mayor, I wink at, Attorney David Hyman and say, and I'll be back with you next year. The next year, I give him another 1-year contract. And the next year, I give him another 1-year contract. I can do that for every year for the entire time, I'm the mayor. And as long as the contract doesn't say for longer than a year, there's no council approval, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the amount is.
Hmm.
Okay. All right, next.
Yeah.
I know I'm making everybody so happy today. All right, what about number 10?
Number 9. So
we
Number
kind of
9.
went over 9, right?
yeah. We know that we were incorrect on this one, so we can move on
Yep.
from number 9. We get it.
So number 10,
Okay.
the city produces an annual report which reconciles the city budget with spending for the fiscal year. I didn't answer true on this one, but what's the real answer?
The real answer is false.
Yeah.
The city never produces an annual report that reconciles the city budget for a particular year with spending. What city council gets is a year-end transfer ordinance where they reconcile by budget category, by budget department and category, what happened in the previous fiscal year. But by then, it's usually December of the following year, so that we adopt a budget in June of 2020. And by December of 2020, 6 months into the new fiscal 21 budget, they're reconciling only the numbers, not programs, only the numbers. And so by then, you're 6 months into a new budget, and nobody knows, or in many cases, nobody really cares. We're now moving on to the next budget. In fact, our consolidated cash account system is so complicated that the Kenny administration actually lost track of $50 million. Anybody remember that?
That's why I answered false. You would think the answer would be true, but it was false because it came out.
They lost track of $50 million. It is an antiquated system. We have a consolidated cash account, and all the money the city collects for any purposes goes into a consolidated cash account. And every time the city wants to make an expenditure, it charges against the appropriating power that's in that consolidated account attributable to that fund. So the water fund, the sewer fund, the general fund, the community development fund, all the money is in one pot. And it gets complicated because the city of Philadelphia, remember I said we were a county? We are on a reimbursement basis for our county expenses. So we fund the Department of Human Services, we fund children and youth, we fund a bunch of health department stuff. We put up the money, and then we make application to the state for reimbursement. And they give us, and what they're always saying is, no, we're denying that. And so we don't really know how much of the money that we actually spent, we will actually get state reimbursement for. And so we really don't know. And those of us who watch the money, we want to know whether or not we had an operating budget or surplus. Councilman Dom knows exactly what that is. So if you want to figure out in a fiscal year whether or not you had an operating deficit or surplus, you can't do that until way down into the new fiscal year because you don't know what your reimbursements are going to be.
There's no tracking of like, hey, in the last 5 years, they've typically reimbursed us for these types of things. So that way we can not like just kind of mitigate risk. I'm not saying that they'll do it over again,
No,
but
there's a lot of speculation.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen times where as much as 20, 30, $40 million worth of requested reimbursement for services the city already spent, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reimbursements are denied. In fact, I went to Harrisburg when Governor Casey was in office and John White Jr. was the Secretary of the Department of Public Welfare, and said to the governor and to the Commonwealth, and I said, we're a county, and I know that we have a contract with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to provide services for children and youth. If you are going to underfund us, if you're not going to reimburse us in the amounts that we spent, you provide the services. You provide them.
Mm-hmm.
because we
Right.
shouldn't have to put up the money in advance, and then you pull out regulations to say, no, we're disallowing this and we're disallowing that and we're disallowing the other thing, and then local taxpayers end up picking up the responsibility for the
As often
provision of
happens.
services that are really county services that should be paid for by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And it even gets more complicated because some of the services were reimbursed 80%, some of them 90%, and some of them 100%. And and unless you are really up on top of it, and
Mhm.
unless you spend some real time and are willing to fight about it, I mean, the Commonwealth can take 5, 10, 15. We spent $1 billion in the Department of Human Services. They can, they can take 2 or 3% and hurt us.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's complicated. And if you do not have line item budgeting where we actually know the money that's spent in every line item in that budget, and unless you have some kind of financial reconciliation and a programmatic reconciliation, almost no one knows how that money was spent.
And Mayor
Well,
Street, I may be a bit green on this, but are there cities or counties that you would proffer are a good example that do actually implement line item budgeting?
well, a lot of municipalities do line item budgeting, but what you have to do is you have to take a look at how they do it and why they do it, and it's got to be granular because, for example, Chicago's relationship to the state is different from New York's. It's different from, New York City's relationship with the New York State, and so you can take some principles from it, but you really do have to take a really, really, really close look at it, and you have to structure something that makes sense for the city of Philadelphia, given our relationship to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the fact that we live in a Commonwealth that is very conservative. That look, when I became the mayor, we were the most Republican state in the United States of America. We had a Republican governor, Republican Senate, Republican House, 2 Republican United States senators, and so you just have to be prepared to fight, and it requires a level of political sophistication that goes beyond just kind of making statements. I mean, I am routinely appalled by the fact that we act like taking the schools back was some big achievement. We got the schools back, which means we get the responsibility, and they gave us no money.
Right.
No money. And not only did they give us no money, they didn't change height. We take the school district back. We keep Height, nice guy, as a superintendent. We have now a board that's nominated by the mayor, appointed by council. Joyce Wilkerson is still the chairperson. Nothing changed. Nothing changed except that we now, as a result of commitments made by the mayor, appear to be the primary person responsible for funding public education. And we can do it. I don't care what they say. If we raise real estate taxes so high, everybody left this city, it wouldn't be enough money to fully fund public education in the city.
Yeah, and it foregoed the fact that something like this pandemic, very unexpected, just adds another layer of money that we're going to have to go find from somewhere.
Yeah. Let's go to the audience questions just because we're getting into time. I wrote like 72 of my own.
You're rushing me, Rachel?
I'm rushing Adam. I'm rushing Adam.
You rushing
I'll take
me?
the
I mean,
blame.
I'm not.
I just want to I have the privilege of being able to ask you these kind of questions all the time, and I just want other people who are on the call to be able to hear some of their answers. So one of the questions was, and I want to get to the one. It says, what is one thing you would have done differently as mayor or as council president? I guess with hindsight being 2020.
One thing.
One thing.
I think I was. It's really hard to second guess yourself when, it's now 12 years later, and it's a kind of a routine question. I think probably, the amount of money that I spent in neighborhoods was probably more than adequate, but I think I probably could have done a little bit more. I knew that development in our communities, that development, and I need to talk a little bit about gentrification. I knew that development was never going to happen in neighborhoods as long as we had open air drug markets, abandoned cars all over the place, vacant lots. I cleaned every vacant lot in the city of Philadelphia twice in my first term. I removed hundreds of thousands of abandoned cars from the neighborhoods, shut down every open air drug market. And I made significant investments in arts and cultural organizations and social service organizations. It probably could have been more. I mean, there were people who were whining about it, but I think it was critical to setting the table so that we actually can push development out of Center City proper and more out into the neighborhoods. But that probably would be the thing. I think we spent a good deal of money, but we probably could have spent more because we needed to make those investments because nobody else was going to.
Great.
Okay. And I know we talked about this yesterday a little bit. How can we continue to improve the perception of Philadelphia as a leading city for innovation and an attractive business center?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is get control of our politics. I mean, we don't have control of our politics. I will tell you, Mayor Bloomberg, the guy that I affectionately refer to as the king of stop and frisk in the United States of America, Mayor Bloomberg dropped $1 million in one of those independent expenditure accounts, went on TV, you know, and pushed Kenny, and it didn't matter what the rest of us said because we couldn't raise the money. I mean, we were having difficulty raising the money. The local campaign finance law has, and David knows this very well, has provisions in it that you can't hardly have a finance committee anymore. They're attribution rules. And so it gets to be really hard to raise money. Look, a lot of people agree with a lot of things that the district attorney is doing. I mean, I actually believe that a lot of the stuff that District Attorney Krasner is doing is really, really good stuff. The reality is that George Soros put $2 million basically in helping him get elected. And that's okay if you like the policies of the person who got elected. If you do not like the policies of the person that got elected, then you're probably unhappy about it. There is an independent expenditure group called I think it's a labor group, and they're putting money into politics all over the place. They took one of the Republican seats, one of the seats that we traditionally refer to as a Republican. They just took that seat and gave it to an independent progressive. I think it's called the Working Families Group. They're out of New York. They'll put up 100,000, 300,000. And so once you have people like Bloomberg and you have people coming in, Soros and all, whether you like their policies or not, it's almost irrelevant. We have lost basic control of our politics. And, you know, Bloomberg doesn't care. Bloomberg doesn't come to the city of Philadelphia and see homeless people sitting on the grates because the mayor won't do anything about it. He doesn't see any of that. He drops $1 million on Kenny because Kenny is for the sugar tax or something. He got his own reasons. But I think we've got to take back our politics. And it is appalling that we don't have the business community in this city, I think, is basically, you know, just sort of sitting around waiting for somebody else to do something. I don't know. I mean, 2023 is going to come, and they're already talking about who's going to get, you know, the progressive money. Who's going to get that money? And they're talking about $2, $3, $4 million. And, you know, you let somebody from out of town come to the city of Philadelphia and drop $2, $3, $4 million on a candidate, you're going to have a hard time.
Mm-hmm.
And these are people who don't know anything about the detail of and the kind of stuff that's going on in our city. They don't really know.
They will after they listen to this call, though.
Some of them might know.
So the next question I want to ask is, over the past decade, Philadelphia has seen substantial real estate development in areas that some would have thought impossible. Can you paint a picture or predict what Philadelphia might look like in another decade?
I think if we don't do something about it, I think our business community is going to be, more and more isolated. I know a person that has for example, has a permanent parking spot in the garage at 1845 Walnut Street that pays monthly taxes of $75. Now, if you want to kill Center City and if you want to, make it almost impossible for people to come into town, just keep raising the parking tax. How about we raise the amusement tax? How about we keep raising the real estate tax? And people are going to just be looking for reasons and opportunities to go someplace else. And nowadays, people don't have to be in the city to benefit from the city's economy. We are seeing that. I think the office space, the amount of office space that's going to be desirable for companies is going to shrink. I think if you get in and around Center City, around Rittenhouse Square and Logan Square and, in Queen Village and those places, they'll do just fine. But you know what? How long is that going to last? How long is it going to last? It'll last. Chestnut Hill probably will always be a really, really nice neighborhood. But I will tell you, there are other parts of this city that are going to suffer dramatically. The number of homeless people is not going to abate because this is a city, and I think our tax base, we run the risk that it stagnates, and we become, we lose the appeal, that we have today, and it's very difficult to know what's going to happen. The other thing is, we are, I think, likely to have a pretty significant change in the political structure, not in the organized structure, in the number of people who are in significant offices. Every time you have a second term mayor, now you're going to have a new mayor, you're going to have new council members. You're going to have a new political establishment. Bob Brady has been my friend for years and years and years. I don't know how long he's going to want to do the stuff that he's doing now. Everybody is wondering how long Council President Clark is going to hang around City Council. I hired him in 1981. Next year he'll be in City Hall 40 years. I was in City Council for 20 years and I was done. Not because it's a bad job, but I couldn't go to City Hall on the second floor for another day. And I think if we don't do something, if we keep raising the real estate tax, we're not going to raise the rates. If we don't do something about the escalating cost of real estate and property ownership in the city, we're going to narrow our options. People are going to find it more, appropriate to go other places and do other things. And I think it's going to be a real challenge for the city. As I said earlier, I think the lines between the city and the suburbs are getting more and more blurred every day. And this whole idea that we all can be here with people, some people are in different parts of the country. I think that's gonna make a change. Look what's happening with the universities. I taught the second part of my semester virtually. I was online and doing committees and doing all kinds of interesting stuff. A bunch of the students really kind of liked it. They were taking my class while they were sitting in bed. But they're not living in the city. They're not paying taxes. They're not, buying food. They're not paying the liquor tax. They're not doing any of that because they're someplace else. And, and they're a significant part of the tax base of the city. I think it's very difficult to predict where we're going, but I will tell you, it will, if we don't take control of our politics, and if there is a serious move to the left in this city, driven by a progressive movement that I think, frankly speaking, is loaded with well-intentioned people. I would be remiss if I didn't say I think all these people mean well. They mean well. For people to be saying, my God, we took back control of our schools. And they're happy about that. And the schools are just as bad, if not worse today than they ever were. You know, it just shows that there is a level of almost naivete about what makes the city work. They're complaining about gentrification. How do we get people in the city of Philadelphia that make a living wage, that work for the University of Pennsylvania or for Drexel or Temple or for that live in these neighborhoods? How do we attract them if we don't build in neighborhoods? You got to build it. Not everybody can live, you know, in a traditional apartment in Center City. So look, I think this is a really interesting moment, and hopefully there are people on this call who will say, look, I got to get involved in this. No one is going to do this for me. Look, and I believe in giving credit where credit is due. Councilwoman Janie Blackwell is my friend. She has been my friend. She will always be my friend. There are a group of progressives who threw her out of office. They threw her right out of office. She and her husband held that office for 44 years. They threw her out of office because that's the nature of politics. And I will tell you, they're going to continue to do the things that they think are right, not the things that we necessarily think are all right. And if we sit back and if we don't do anything, and if we say, well, I can't get involved in this, that, or the other, well, you know what? They're going to do what they think is right. And just because you and I think it's not right, just because we think we have, you know, the public policy high ground, that means nothing to them. I'm telling you, some of these people are rolling. They're already planning for 2023. They're planning because they're going to do everything they can to take that other seat from the Republicans. The Republicans are going to be a party in this city, if it's not careful, that has Brian O'Neill on city council.
Wow.
All right. That's my story.
Yeah. So, yeah, you know, thank you so much. I know we have a bunch of other questions, so I think people can still post. I will ask the mayor for, you know, if he can spend some time, maybe give some feedback, and we can kind of answer those as one-offs. You know, it's an absolute pleasure. I will say, you know, I don't feel too bad about asking because you can hear the passion in your voice. So I don't think you mind talking about this stuff, but thank you so much as always.
It's so boring.
and there's no doubt, you're absolutely right. We are at a real turning point, I think, now more than ever in the last few years, that things are going to change one way or the other. So thank you again for your time.
Right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Yep.
You too. Bye-bye.
The last last
just
part
go through the updates.
Yeah, let me switch over to that real quick.
Just really quickly, we'll just breeze through this since got like 2 minutes.
So you know, what we found out, you know, a couple of days ago is real estate professionals, the bill passed saying they could work again. The mayor vetoed it in a way that he just basically—
Not the mayor, the governor.
I apologize. The Governor Wolf, in a way that just basically limited it down. So there are certain ways you can work under that. So you can work, but it was definitely mitigated a bit. OPA, we found out today from BIA, they issued some guidance on filing tax abatements. Essentially, you can now mail in or email your abatements submissions in. Alternatively, you can still do what they originally suggested, which is wait until they're open, and they will basically deem everything timely that comes to their office within 45 days of reopening, whenever that may be the case.
And next week, we have the next 2 weeks lined up. So next week, we will have special guest Salima Cunningham, who is the head of communications and coordination and outreach, community outreach for the Office of Property Assessment, to discuss abatements, tax assessment, and the OPA's new CAMA system. For those who don't know, it's a computer-assisted mass appraisal system. I only know that because of working for Councilman Dom. That was something that he really pressed on a lot to get that technology implemented. So we're going to hear from her on that. Please submit any questions about the abatement and the new appraisal system ahead of time. Salima wants to make sure that we can get as accurate of answers as possible to everyone's questions, and to make sure that all the experts at OPA who govern all of these issues can get us those responses. So please send in those questions. And then we will be having a conversation on subdivisions and consolidations. This has been asked for by a couple of people who've been tuning in, and we'll have input from our go-to civil engineer, Kevin Smith from Stantec. So that's sort of the next 2 weeks lined up.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week.
Yep. Bye.